Okay, so this is the second video on psychological disorders and the last video of the semester. So this is the last one I will be recording. Um, I sure wish we could have ended the semester where we could see each other, and I hope you're doing okay. So I'm going to talk about a whole set of disorders in the next 15 minutes. Hopefully this will help if you've not heard of them before. Probably most of you have heard of the next one that I want to talk about, which is called obsessive compulsive disorder. Now, I'd like you to know the difference between an obsession and a compulsion. An obsession is the thought that won't leave a person's head. It's intrusive. One of the most common OCD behaviors and thought obsessions is actually, especially now with the pandemic, I'm contaminated. I have corona, and so these thoughts just rush through a person's head, and they won't stop, and it creates a lot of anxiety. So the obsession is the thought that is intrusive and won't leave a person's head. The compulsion is the behavior they do to try to bring down that anxiety. So they use hand sanitizer, they wash their hands. I mean, right now, that's not a bad idea. But you can imagine if someone has obsessive compulsive tendencies, something like the current pandemic is going to be really bad at making those symptoms worse. So obsessive compulsive disorders, the obsession is the unwanted intrusive thoughts, the compulsion is the behavior. Just like we talked about with phobias, engaging in the compulsive behavior like hand washing is going to bring down anxiety. And it's going to increase the odds that a person is going to wash their hands again when that anxiety goes up. So OCD symptoms are kept in place by negative reinforcement. So much so that a person, there are some folks who can wash their hands over 50 to over 100 times a day. And it can be pretty bad. The best treatment is, again, exposure therapy. Expose a person to the thing that, like, get their hands contaminated, but then with their permission, don't allow them to wash their hands, and let them sit it out, basically. Typically what you find with phobias and OCD is that what's called anticipatory anxiety. It's the anticipating, waiting for the horrible thing to happen that doesn't happen. That anticipatory anxiety is really worse than the actual thing that a person thinks they fear, that like a dog or like being actually contaminated. So this can be pretty difficult. I once had a client who was suicidal because this OCD symptoms would not let them rest. It can be pretty painful for a person who has it. Another disorder, and so I'm kind of skipping around a little bit here. It's called dissociative identity disorder. It used to be called multiple personality disorder. And in this situation, the person has more than one personality within themselves. This is it's a rare disorder. And it's thought from case studies, something that we see oftentimes is that a person who lived through typically traumatic sexual childhood abuse before the age of 10, that this is a disorder that might evolve for them. If you think about it, a child who, now this is deep, sorry to do this on the video, but a child who's young has a real primitive way of dealing with everyday life. Typically it's like just splitting things off. And so if a kid is sitting there eating breakfast and realizing oh, there's my parent who's got to take me to school now, and they're the ones who molested me last night, that's too much. And so a kid will learn to when the abuse is happening, this is the not me. This is not happening to me, it's happening to the not me. And just basically creates a brick wall in their psychological state so that that material is unavailable. And in so doing, they create these fractures within their personality. When a person grows up to be an adult, then they oftentimes in these different personalities can have one personality that is the worker, one who's like a baby, one who's sexualized, one who's a fighter, all these different, and they come up and they typically at different times when the environment calls for it, but they won't have any memory for being in another personality when they're in that one particular personality. So really, really tough disorder. I'm going to switch gears to the next one, and this is a whole class of disorders in some ways. Schizophrenia, I call it a class of disorders because it has a different course for many people. Some have one episode and they can improve and get better. Some have one and just get consistently worse. Some have repeated episodes and gets worse and worse and worse. the different courses of this disorder for different people, and we're not sure exactly why. There are two major symptom sets that I'd like you to be familiar with. There are positive and also what they call negative symptoms. And I don't mean pleasant and unpleasant. I mean, positive is like a plus sign. You add a new behavior to a person's behavioral set. So, some of the positive symptoms that we see when a person develops schizophrenia, usually in the early 20s is when that happens, is you have disorganized thinking. They'll make up words. They'll rhyme everything. So I have the word clang up there. That's called clang. When they do clang, that's like, if you hear the word clang, they go clang, rang, dang, tang, sang, mang. I mean, they'll just do that and won't stop. Word salads. It's like you take the words in a normal sentence, toss them up like the ingredients of salad. Where they land is how it comes out of a person's mouth. I posted a video called 3 Interviews with People with Schizophrenia. I'd like you to see the different types of symptoms that would be there. I'd like you to know the difference between delusions and hallucinations. Delusions are false beliefs, believing that that like the FBI or CIA is out to get you. That'd be a paranoid delusion. There's also delusions of reference, that a person thinks that someone on the TV is referring to them, or they see a car driving by and see people talking, that they're referring to me. That's a delusion of reference. So delusion is false belief, whereas hallucination is having a perception that other people don't share. The most common ones, hearing voices other people don't hear, but it can also be seeing things that other people don't see, feeling things on your skin. Those are also a type of hallucination that happens. Interesting, when you put a person who has auditory hallucinations or hearing voices in an fMRI, the part of the brain is active when you and I are having a conversation, when I'm producing speech, that's active in their brain. And so what's happening is they have that part of their brain active. They don't realize that the voices are actually being generated by themselves. Also, you can get inappropriate behavior and emotions, where a person will just like go from laughing to crying to being really angry. And so there's some unpredictability with it. The negative symptoms, again, that's not like these ones are pleasant and the others are unpleasant. Negative symptoms of schizophrenia involve subtracting. So you got a subtraction sign. You subtract things you would typically see in an everyday person. So a person normally talks fluently. Once they start to develop these symptoms, they just basically, they have a hard time communicating verbally. They have flat affect, so their facial expressions are like that. I mean, there's no emotionality to how they would express. They can't get motivated to do anything. They may stop showering, changing clothes, brushing their teeth, and they socially withdraw. So these are some of the negative symptoms that go along with this. If you look at the factors that, it's about 1% of the population has this, but is the most disruptive psychological disorder that we know about, because a person basically cannot function. Unfortunately, a lot of people with this disorder end up in prison because, they're not interacting with the world in a rational way. They may end up taking food so they can live, but then if they get thrown into the system, the criminal justice system, they also can't follow the rules, so they get deeper and deeper in, and it's horrible. The factors that contribute to a person developing this, genetics account for a big chunk of it. If a person has an identical twin and that identical twin has schizophrenia, the odds are that that other person will have it is about 50%. Same with both. So, but that doesn't, genetics don't account for all of it, but it accounts for a significant portion. I thought there was more. Also, another factor that seems to be influential in developing schizophrenia, if a mom is in her, I think it's her second, I can't remember which trimester she's in, if she develops the flu or something with a fever as the fetus is developing, that appears to have a major impact on the likelihood that the child that she's going to give birth to will develop schizophrenia later in life. So it's like a vulnerability of the developing fetus. If a person has a family history of schizophrenia, grandparents, uncles, aunts, when they reach, that person themselves reaches late adolescence, smoking weed is not a good thing. It appears to really contribute to a vulnerability for developing these type of symptoms. So that is a serious factor to consider. The last set of disorders I want to talk about are mood disorders. And so in the last 5 minutes, we'll talk briefly about that. And say this is a class of disorders. This includes depression, which you know about. I mean, I really don't even feel like I have to say that much about it, because, I mean, everyone knows someone who's been depressed. And so you have these type of symptoms. A person will actually, I had down here, they'll gain weight or lose weight because they either like eat to like comfort themselves, or they lose interest in everything, including eating. And so they don't eat at all. Sleeping can go either way too. A person will sleep for 14, 15 hours, or they wake up at 2 in the morning and they can't get back to sleep. You get a lot of fatigue, feeling worthless, a lot of guilt, can't concentrate, suicidal thoughts, and being hopeless. So you can imagine, I mean, if a person has 4 of these following issues, I mean, that's overwhelming for a person. There are suicide hotlines out there that I recommend if you've ever had to deal with a friend who's suicidal. But I've had students come to my office at Lincoln telling me that they can't concentrate and that it's been hard for them to get out of bed. And I start just asking some of these questions and find out, yeah, they're dealing with depression. And this is a real disorder. It gets in the way of functioning. So if you remember that dysfunctionality, this depression is a major source of that. So additional things here, substance abuse and suicide risk are really high. It's worldwide, very, very common. It'll end by itself, but it ends a lot faster with therapy. So there are really good therapeutic techniques for confronting and challenging the major depressive disorder. A lot of people who develop depression often have had a very stressful life event within the previous few months. So that could be losing their job, ending a major relationship, failing out of school, having a car accident. So stress contributes to depression in a significant way. There are biological factors there. Also, trying to think what else I want to talk about here. Do you remember in the memory chapter we had state-dependent memory, where it was like mood-dependent memory? So when a person gets in a depressed mood, all they can remember are depressing thoughts and depressing events. So that is a factor that contributes to the ongoing nature of depression once a person develops it. I think that's all I'm going to say about that. The last disorder that we'll talk about this semester is bipolar disorder. Whereas depression is considered to be unipolar, bipolar is like having the 2 poles of planet Earth, right? The North Pole and the South Pole. So if the South Pole is low, and that's depression, then the North Pole is the up, the energy, the high energy. And that's what a manic episode characterizes bipolar disorder. So a person, if they have bipolar disorder, they're going to have periods of depression, but they'll also have the periods of exaggerated energy. And they will have what I have listed here as manic symptoms. Well, they'll be overly talkative. They can't stay on a single subject. They'll feel really euphoric, like on top of the world. Or sometimes they'll be really agitated, and they can get sometimes aggressive because of that. They will not need sleep. They can go like hours, like they can go for days, with just a few hours of sleep. They'll go from one project to the next project to the next project and never finish it. Typically can ruin families. A person who's in a manic episode may spend the whole life savings of a family, or they may get sexually adventurous, basically, and start sleeping with anyone that moves who will have them. And that often results in problems for relationships, obviously. About 1% of the population has this too, a strong genetic component to it. I've posted a video on Canvas that I'd like you to watch. It says a manic episode video. And you're going to see a person who's in a pretty manic state. The problem with bipolar disorder is a lot of times if a person feels that euphoria, like when it's all the energy, they're on top of the world, they don't want to take their medications. They feel like I can handle it. But as soon as the medications stop, the manic episodes begin again, and then all sorts of problematic behaviors go along with that. One more slide to show you here, and you can see that in a fMRI, in a manic state, all the neurons are firing. And it's hard to even control it because it's like the brain is just so active, trying to like be able to guide one's attention to a single thought and follow it through is a very difficult thing for a person within a manic state. Obviously, in the depressed state, you have a lot less neural activity. So those are the major disorders. It's another 15 minutes, and we are at the end of the semester. I hope you're doing really well, and take care of yourself.